Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening to everyone, and welcome to the launch of the book From Special School to Resource Center, Supporting Vulnerable Young Children in Central and Eastern Europe, a guide for positive change. My name is Mihaela Ionescu. I'm Program Director in ISA, and I'm very honored to be host of this special event, when together we will explore the richness of knowledge that is hidden between the covers of this book. It has been published in December last year with the support of the Early Childhood Program at the Open Society Foundation. And it represents a testimony of a long-term investment, commitment, and work of the Early Childhood Program in countries in the Central and Eastern Europe, with a special focus on the most vulnerable children and families. I feel privileged to have the opportunity to talk today with the authors of the book and with three esteemed experts in Central Eastern European countries. Allow me to introduce you Professor Dr. Lani Florian, Bell Chair of Education and Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. Dr. Dragana Sretenov, Senior Consultant and former Senior Team Leader at the Early Childhood Program in the Open Society Foundation. Welcome. Professor Dr. Stefania Alisauskiene at the Academy of Education, Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas, Lithuania. Antula Kefalinu, Project Manager at the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. Welcome, Antula. And lastly, but not leastly, Natalia Sophie, First Deputy Director at the Ukrainian Institute for Education Development at the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. A warm welcome to all of you. And before starting the conversation with our guests, I very briefly would like to provide a few insights about this book. The topic that is addressing is very challenging and a very complex one, the transformation of special schools in resource centers. A change that requires a lot of concerted efforts and commitment at multiple levels, involving various stakeholders, a journey that needs to be well-informed, well-planned, and very strategically pursued. The book in this sense is it's extremely resourceful. The three sections are pointing to three important aspects: the rationale for this change and the inclusive approach to change, the collaboration and coordination between individuals and teams when planning and assisting children, as well as in assessing their progress, and finally, the strategies for change management. But perhaps what is very important about this guide is that it's very action-oriented and solution-focused. It is informed by tested practice in multiple countries, provides a policy analysis for anchoring the change process, and most importantly, includes many tools, case studies, case scenarios, all of them aiming at illustrating or enabling this transformation process. And also a very rich appendix with resources that are focusing either on policies or practices. All of them aim to support the change process proposed by the guide. During our discussion, you are kindly invited to use the chat section for sharing comments, or the Q&A section to address questions to our guests. We have considered two such moments during our conversation. And so feel free to share them there. My colleague Alyosha Rudash, our program officer in ISA, will help us in bringing them forward to our guests. We will start with the first question that we were proposing to our guests today. And of course, we will start with the authors of the book. Why this book on the transformative process from special schools to resource centers? And why now? And I will invite first Dragana. You have been, Dragana, pivotal in making this publication possible, and also a very powerful engine in the work done by the Early Childhood Program at the Open Society Foundation in Central Eastern Europe in the area of inclusive education and early childhood intervention. Let us know what has been the drive in writing this guide together with Lani Florian. Dragana, the floor is yours, yes.
Thank you, Michaela, for this rich introduction. Good morning and a very warm welcome to the launch. I'm excited and honored to be here today. Thank you for joining us. The book we are launching today was conceptualized and developed during the final year of the Early Childhood Program, and it is inspired by the program's learning from the inclusive education initiatives implemented in the Central and Eastern Europe region over nearly a decade. The program was also part of many ongoing and emerging transformative practices in the region led by the governments and key stakeholders, which have supported a broader restructuring of services aimed at young children and encourage improved multi-sectoral coordination and collaborations, including between mainstream and special education settings. This work, implemented in different countries, including in, and I will name only some of them, Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Tajikistan, Moldova, has helped Open Society Foundation to identify key enabling factors and challenges in supporting inclusive education reforms, but also practical implications of these transformative changes for the institutions and professionals involved and their ongoing needs for support and guidance. This guide is a response to these needs in the region. It incorporates the evidence-based practices and international legislation and builds on the collaborations between Open Society Foundation staff and partners, supported by the academic rigor and expertise of Professor Florian. It provides plenty of concrete strategies, ideas, and examples that promote teams working across key areas of practice to support transformation of special schools to resource centers within the framework of inclusion in its broadest sense that benefits all children attending mainstream settings. It pays special attention to young vulnerable children and promotes opportunities for them to access high quality inclusive early childhood and primary services, which are known to benefit them greatly. The book was supported by different departments of Open Society Foundation and a number of experts from the region who were actively involved in shaping and validating this publication, and we are honored that some of them are contributing to the panel discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragana. And I suppose that it has been in your mind for a long time to come to fruition this work into a guide as we are able to read today and learn from all the experience that has been gathered by so many countries. And I think that in this case, Professor Florian has been also extremely instrumental, contributing with her wealth of experience in the field of inclusive education, working in many other countries. And I think it has been a process of maturating a lot of reflections and learnings throughout so many years of working at different levels in systems in countries. And I will invite now Professor Florian to also share what has been the drive or what motivated you also in writing this book together with Dragana.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. It's really exciting to see on the participant bar how many people are with us today. And it's wonderful to finally be here after such a long journey in experience in the region, but also then in working with that experience to produce a guide that we sincerely hope will be relevant and useful and help improve our provision as we go forward. You know, an important part of why this project and why this book now is because these kinds of strategies, these kinds of moves from to transform our institutions, to make them align more with 21st century ideas about provision, is an international movement. And this notion of reducing discrimination by improving the quality of provision and services in mainstream societies and schools and institutions is very important. And it's one that, underpins policies that we see now in countries about the need to transform special schools into resource centers. So there is a policy context. It's part of a global movement for doing this work. And there is also many, many experiences of transforming special schools into resource centers that have been implemented in different parts of the world over many, many years. So it seemed that the time was right to do some stock taking, to say, on the one hand, we have lessons that have been learned from the experiences in other places. And we also have pilot projects in the Central and Eastern European region there, where there's important information that we can now draw upon to pull things together and think about some strategies for how we develop practice further. We also were very aware that we have been working on this idea for a long time, and it's still challenging. So for us, the need to develop a guide that was really practical, that would draw on experience, but also then help people develop their practice was really important. And that's why we're so grateful for all of our colleagues who supported us in this along the way. Dragana and I are the two main authors, but we did not do this work alone. We did this with the colleagues that we have worked with over many years, and our friends and critical friends who gave us feedback, provided support, read drafts, and then as well as shared the research that has been done on this topic. So we have taken the opportunity to do the stock taking. We have tried to really address what we consider to be some of the really difficult barriers that still exist in the region. And we'll be talking about some of the strategies as we go on. But we are just delighted to be here today and look forward to hearing from others as well.
Thank you so much, Lani. As we can understand, while it does draw on the experience of the work done in Central Eastern Europe, we might understand also that the learnings that are catalyzed in this guidebook can be useful also in other parts of the world that could undergo under this, or with the same process of rethinking, reshaping the way that the services are provided for the vulnerable groups. Because I think that's also an important point. This is not just about the children with disabilities. This guide is talking to those that are working with children that have very specific needs that come from different types of vulnerabilities, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us of that. But we also draw heavily on experiences of working with children with disabilities because they remain the most disenfranchised and the most vulnerable of all vulnerable groups. But in the same way that it's not only about disability, the strategies apply to all vulnerable children, it also, the problem-solving approach that we take in the guide will resonate with people who work with children who are older than early years. Although the focus and the impetus for this really came from early years because that's where we begin. But we hope that there will be something for many professionals working at lots of different levels in the system within the guide. Thank you.
And I think this, yes, I think this was another thing that we perhaps should mention, that because the title says special schools, so it could be misleading that we are talking about age of children that are attending schools. Maybe we can add here a clarification.
That we're talking about all kinds of provision. Yeah, there may be a specialist, another kind of specialist facility that's providing early years experience, and it's not technically a school, but it's a formalized, it's formalized within the system within a country.
Mm-hmm. Dragana, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I'm happy to add, because the book is inspired by the experiences of very young children, because this was the legacy of the early childhood program. However, young children tend to transit to primary settings, and children need to be supported by different sectors and different services. So the book is actually calling for improved collaborations and coordination between all kinds of services. They can actually benefit young children on their journey from receiving support when they're very young, and the support is likely to be critical for them in the early years, but also during their transitions to early grades or primaries, and moving a little bit broader than that to higher grades of primary education. And maybe the last point, that the book was inspired by experiences in this specific region, but the models and approaches and strategies offered in the book are likely to be of much broader relevance beyond this region.
Thank you so much to both of you for this clarification. And I think that now perhaps people are getting more curious of what is in this book in the end. And we will start kind of uncovering the mystery by moving ahead with some of the questions and inviting now our panelists to also answer to some of these. Well, let's see, what is the main contribution of this book on for the inclusive education field? Because of course there are many resources out there, but being a recent one, and as we have heard, building on a wealthy of experience and innovations that have happened in many countries. What is new about it? What do we feel that contributes now? With what contributes most in the building of the thinking, of the rethinking, actually, of the way that we are looking at the services that are provided for the most vulnerable children? And I will invite at this point Natalia. Natalia, you have worked for more than 25 years, I would say, in the field of education. We are not going to disclose the age in Ukraine, and have been part of many reforming changes in your country. And you've been highly instrumental in the work done for inclusive education, especially. I know that it has been one of your passions, that the field that has been closest to your heart. Given your experience and expertise now looking more at the country level, but not only, where do you see the main contribution of this guide?
Yes, thank you, Michaela, and hello everybody, morning, afternoon, evening. So first of all, my big thanks for inviting me as one of the panelists of the presentation of this book, which I believe is very useful and inspiring resource. Yes, you are right, Michaela. In Ukraine, now we are in process of the running educational reform, which is called New Ukrainian School. But inclusive education is one of the part of this reform, and we are actively involved in it. So thinking about the question about the main contribution of this book to the inclusive education field, I think what is really the main contribution and what makes us to really rethink about inclusive process is inclusive approach to change, which is described on the page 17. We all know that inclusive education in many cases requires the support of the specialists, but it can be provided without exclusionary practices associated with segregated forms of provision. At the same time, the insight that segregated forms of provision are discriminatory because they exclude some children from what is available to others does not mean that staff in special schools no longer have a role to play. Their expertise have made a valuable contribution to high-quality services in the inclusive settings, but some changes to the way that specialist staff work are needed. So as special schools move from the existing service delivering model of separate provision to the model of the inclusive provision, staff will have to make changes to their way of working. And I think it's very important because really it makes the service provision not just as a separate but as an inclusive approach. And I was very happy to see that Ukrainian case, which followed by the description of this inclusive approach, Ukrainian case done by my colleagues, Stefania Alisauskiena, who also participates in this presentation, and Mariana Onufrik from Social Synergy of Ukraine, which reflects this approach. Thank you.
Thank you also, Natalia. And I think that we will talk also by responding to other questions about this important role that we see in the way that the specialists themselves are internalizing the inclusive approach, and they see it as one of the way of being part of the solution and no longer be part of the problem. So I think this is, it's not only about transforming an institution, it's about also transforming the way that the professionals are perceiving their own role in the process and how they are managing this transition of themselves as professionals throughout the process. I will invite now Stefania to see what is from her perspective. Stefania, you have worked for more than 20 years. You have an experience of a speech therapist and more than 10 years working as a university professor on inclusive early childhood education. You have also worked on inclusive education issues in many countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So I think that with this lens of various, let's say, experience that you have had, we would like to hear what do you think from your perspective that is the main contribution of this book to the field?
Thank you, Michaela, for your nice words. And dear audience, dear colleagues, dear panelists, and of course, dear authors, this is my pleasure, and I'm very delighted to be with you and to share some of my reflections on this very important and useful book, not only for practitioners, but also for policymakers and families, of course. So, and I would like to invite the reader to pay special attention, I should say, in the book, to the systemic view on developing inclusive capability of the education system as a whole. As in the book, there is a special focus on strong links between education policy and practice, also schools, families, learners, and other professionals. Because inclusive education covers all systems, we cannot organize or improve only one fragment, but this is a systemic way, and I find it in the book as a very important notion to be back and to reflect on that. Also the importance of the role of families in various educational processes, so such as referrals, such as assessment, evaluation, planning, sometimes working together, and a lot of attention on empowering parents to support development of children that is emphasized in a guide. And I put some pages, even 28, 29, 32, etc. So I think those aspects are very important, and they never need to be forgotten in this context. And thank you, Lani and Dragana, for this issue in your guide.
Thank you so much, Stefania. Yes, and I would invite now Lani to think. I mean, I think that all the time when you're writing a piece and you have put a lot of thought and energy into doing it, you always kind of step back and you reflect after a while, where do we think that this would be the greatest contribution that you planned by writing the book together with Dragana to make? So from your perspective, where do you think that the main contribution would sit? Because you have had a long experience also in the field. So where does that weigh in the most?
Thank you. I think for me, it's bringing together information from areas of research and experience that have not been brought together in the past. So for example, we have the change management strategies that we just heard a little bit about. But what is integrated in that is the notion of person-centered planning, which is a tool for inclusion that was first developed in Canada quite a few years ago now, but it was developed by people with disabilities as a way to empower them to be better advocates for themselves and to live self-determined lives. And what we're doing in this guide is taking the principled approach of person-centered planning and saying, how can we integrate this within systems change? So that we're also, we're applying it with younger children and their families, but we're also doing it at the level of the individual. So we're integrating the systemic change that has to occur and the changes to professional practice that Natalia and Stefania have talked about. But then we're saying, well, what's a practical way that we bring children and families into this and we apply the changes we're undergoing to the way that we provide services to children. So actually, if you go back to the previous slide for a minute, I just want to mention these two slides are person-centered planning tools from Inclusion Press, which is explained in great detail in the guide. But what I want to point out about these two tools that we talk about for today is that it's a way of thinking about professional planning that focuses on what's important to children and their families. So when you use a map, which is a person-centered planning tool, you ask a family, what is your story? What is the story of you and your child and the need for additional support? And what's your dream for the child? And what's the child's dream and aspiration for himself or herself? You also then consider what are you afraid of? What's scary to you? And there are fears that families of vulnerable children will be facing. And we address those in using this tool before we even start to plan. We learn as much as we can about the hopes and the fears of children and families. And then we start to think about the planning. If you go to the next slide, you see a very, very similar person-centered tool that is about creating a vision for a possible future. And this one is used over a longer period of time, and it's especially useful in very complicated and complex cases. So I'm just taking a minute today to point out how we integrate these tools with the support, I will say, of Inclusion Press. The hyperlink is at the bottom of the slide. There are also the details about this and the link to other free resources that provide even more detail about this approach are included in the guidance. And I will just conclude my remark on this point by saying for colleagues in the region, there are a couple of books that are free to download in Russian that go into great detail about this. And so I'm excited about being able to include that in a guide about systemic change.
Thank you so much, Lani. I think that you captured very well what I think it's essential for the book. The way that connects all the existing thinking around system change and how that happens in practice at individual level, be that professionals, be that parents, be those that are leading services, so that we created like a roadmap. I think this is what the guidebook perhaps proposes, like a roadmap if you want to navigate this change, what has been already out there. And this has been, I think, your tremendous effort of connecting all these pieces of the puzzle into a framework of thinking, in an inclusive approach framework of thinking, so that it can be implemented by those that are part of the system. And we will get to the question for who is actually this guide later on. Let's have a pause here and see if there are our colleagues that are at home and listening to us might have some questions or comments around the already shared ideas regarding the content of the book. Alyosha, do you have news for us?
So actually, we have two messages, And one is from Mark, and he's first of all saying that it's an excellent book at the critical time. And he would also like to know more how much of the implementation is actually dependent on the trained educators and receptive school system to educate all students.
Okay, so let's see who would like to provide an answer to this question. So I will repeat to how much of the implementation is dependent on trained educators and a receptive school system to educate all students.
I'm happy to have a go,
Please,
Michaela.
Dragana.
And Lani might want to add, or our panelists. We do believe that training is important, and receptive school systems also do play a crucial role. And there is an emphasis in the book also on head teachers and principals, so those who are actually should have knowledge and sensitivity to changes happening in their institutions and who should be able to support them. But we also believe that the reform processes are already ongoing, and this was an inspiration for this book. So every single country in the region that I mentioned at the beginning that we supported with an inclusive education initiative of Open Society Foundation have already had ongoing processes of transforming schools and systems. In many cases, professionals and institutions are part of these systems with very little training, but they are actually still expected to play the role in it. So more training, more sensitivity, of course, is going to be hugely helpful, but we do believe that this guide, which is extremely practical, with all tools and resources, can already support professionals who are on the path of reforming their current positions, professional positions.
Yes, Lani, do you want to add something, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I completely endorse what Dragana has just said, and I would only add that it is the case in every country I have ever worked in that there is a lot of variability in practice. And if we wait for everyone to be in the same place at the same time and have complete training and complete readiness, we never get started. So when we wrote the guide, we also took account of the fact that we're applying this guide in an imperfect world, and we have to start somewhere. And that's why we were so focused on practical strategies, so that people maybe would feel that they could do something and they didn't have to wait for another change that is out of their control in another part of the system. And we hope that it will, be useful in that way. But I agree that training and all those things are important. I'm just saying you have to start somewhere.
Yes, there have been also some other questions related, and I'm pretty sure that perhaps also the other colleagues, the panelists can contribute to this, to answering to this question, because of course in people's minds, it's obvious that this is a change that is not embraced, that easily. And there can be a lot of resistance to it. And what has been your experience in addressing, changing the mentality and the attitudes of people? Because this could be something that has been always a challenge. And also the other question was to what extent there was a reluctance to such a reform, and what made the difference in changing the point of view, in trying to make that point of view change, to convince either the schools or the professionals working in those schools to embrace this inclusive approach that is promoted also through the guide.
Mihaela, if I can start, I will just say that we totally accept that position and understanding that there will be resistance. Not everyone agrees that we should undertake these changes. So the colleagues who are required, some colleagues will be required to make the changes even if they don't want to. Other colleagues will want to make the changes but not feel that they have the tools or the support to make them. That's what I meant by variability. And that's why we take a problem-solving approach to change, in the guidance, and we've really tried to draw on theories of change and on the kinds of, this acceptance of uncertainty, the acceptance that not all people agree, to use some strategies that help us to listen more carefully to what people's concerns are, and to have mutual respect for the positions of other people so that we can build confidence and rapport and start planning small step changes together and grow practice. So we're not taking a big stick to this. We're saying we start small and we grow together, and then good things follow, and then the practice grows.
Yes, I think that we will refer to all this change processes in the continuation of our discussion. Thank you to all those who have shared their questions, and we will come back to you in a while. Let's move to the next question that we have planned for us to discuss today, because I think we have already touched a little bit upon on this, but I think I was saying at the very beginning that is very solution oriented and action focused, and I would like us to unpack a little bit the content of the book in terms of the concrete actions that are to be taken. And I will first invite Antula to provide an answer to this question. Antula, you're representing a very important European organization. I think everybody has heard about it, the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. Thus, you have a lot of knowledge about the mechanics of developing and translating policies in realities, informed by experiences in many countries, and the struggle either to develop such policies, but much more of implementing them. So how does this guide inform such concrete actions of, moving the needle from what the reality is and what the reality would like to see for vulnerable children, and especially for children with disabilities? Antula, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First of all, of course, I would like to say a big thank you to Lani and Dragana. It was a pleasure to be able to contribute to the development of this, as I consider it a very useful and practical guide. It's true, listening to the discussion so far, it's true that it is a challenge endeavor, and the teachers do need responses that work for everyone, and mainstream specialists can help towards this direction. So this is where what I would like to highlight, and in terms of concrete action, I think this guide includes very, very good examples. I would like to direct specifically the reader on page 27, when there is the inclusive pedagogical approach. This provides a very good model, a practical model of how technology is used in learning. Likewise, the lesson plan, this is on page 39. You can see it on your screens. It provides an example of a lesson that is responsive to individual needs in the context of a mainstream setting. So besides the classroom environment, this guide includes specific examples and emphasizes on family and school linkages. I think it's worth checking the work specifically from Diane and Philip Ferguson. These researchers have studied specifically the family professional interactions, and they propose some useful strategic approaches for shaping authentic partnerships with families. Now, if you check the scenarios on page 30 to 32, you will see that it helps to develop new ways of thinking about how we approach families in the school. As the previous panelists have noted, this is a key in making changes. And finally, for the collaboration between resource centers and schools, I think a very useful starting point is discussed on page 49 and 50 on table 6, which provides specific steps that can be taken to help teams to begin to work with each other. And these examples overall, I think they are They're very helpful so that we start reflecting on how we can learn from each other, how we can collaborate and use the expertise, the mutual expertise with different partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Antula. I will invite now Natalia to share her reflection on what are the concrete actions that you find valuable in this guide. I mean, perhaps you want to bring more again the country perspective. How do you think that the efforts that are now undergoing in your country can be of extremely use for being implemented?
Yes, thank you, Michaela. And I would like to base on the Mark's question about whether trained educators are important, and totally and fully support that question, because we all know that a crucial factor in all change process is professional development. And yes, I mentioned our new Ukrainian school reform, and here we also can see that professional development is crucial. And what I like to mention that the change management approach, which I mentioned earlier, and which was also commented by Stefania and presented in previous slides, it also, in spite of its, I think maybe a specific context-related meaning, it has some kind of universal mechanism, because it can work in different contexts. What I mean that when we speak about professional development, very often we understand that it occurs as a result of training that is provided by others, but also it can be self-directed and take place in so-called professional learning communities. And this movement we just passing in Ukraine, trying to really develop this kind of professional development where people learn from each other, and very often now it happens online instead of offline, but still it is very, very valuable. So because really we think that this approach, even it calls change management approach, but it really helps to changes of attitudes, changing the skills, changing the experience, which is crucial for changes. And we believe that this approach can help teams navigate complex institutional changes and service expansion. It can be very useful for all stakeholders, staff of the inclusive schools and the resource centers. It can help to document what works well and why things sometimes are not working as planned. And these 5 steps, this mechanism provide really action plan to guide change. So I was very happy, and we are now thinking how to institutionalize this approach in Ukraine. Thank you.
One question, Natalia, because I think it would be interesting perhaps also for those that are participating in this meeting. You already have such resource center functioning in Ukraine.
Yes, we call them inclusive resource centers. Yeah, okay. And as I mentioned, the case Ukrainian case, it's I think it's page 18. Mm-hmm.
So it would be interesting for colleagues to look in the book and learn from the experience you have been through. I think it took some years to get there, right?
Yes, but still we are in the process, and because as it was said earlier, so it's the process. It's the reform. It's ever going process. So you cannot stop. Like inclusion is the process, and say, okay, now we have inclusion.
True, it's an ongoing challenge. I will turn now to Stefania to hear also her view on where does she think that the guide informs concrete actions for this transformative process. Stefania, you're having the floor.
Thank you, Michaela. As I read the book, and I see very fluent text of the book, all sections of the guide of the book are interlinked, and going from general understanding of transformations towards inclusive education from early childhood education and care to school in various contexts. So I like this you know, way from general understanding of changes towards very concrete even case studies in the book. And I found several case studies from respectful countries as Lithuania. I was happy to read it because I'm from Lithuania, also from Greece, from Georgia, Ukraine, as Natalia said, etc. And it equips the reader with the concrete actions. You see, as a reader, how they did this, what the process is, etc. But nevertheless, the own country context, social, economical, historical, cultural context, never to be forgotten in order to ensure developments in policy and practice in your country context, because we are different, and this is nice. This is rich context and background. So taking into consideration some cases, for example, I just want to say some words about Lithuanian case and experience, as in the book in page 9 it was nicely presented, going from special schools to this big movement towards mainstream schools and inclusive education. But we already in this process for 30 years. And I should say, we're still in a process. And in this, some years at the moment, we're doing a lot, because we are revising the functions and the roles of teachers, of our specialists, of professionals we call educational support professionals, because these changes and transformations, they are forever. And for some people, as I found in a book in page 24, there is a resistance to these changes because something changes in their life, in their work, etc. But this is normal. This is normal, and this is inspiring to do something else and to understand that we need to reflect, we need to revise our attitudes and our practices. So thank you.
Thank you also very much, Stefania. I mean, it's such a delight to talk with you, but we will have to look also at how the time is passing, and we are heading towards the last question that we prepared for all of you. Just wanted to ask Alyosha if we have any, this would be the last opportunity to take some of the questions, if there are from our audience.
Yes, Mihaela, so we have one question,
yes.
And this one is more related to pre-service training. So if there is in the book perhaps a section that refers how early childhood education's graduate student can change their attitudes while working with children in a more inclusive way.
Very interesting. Who would like to answer to this question? Lani or Dragana, would you feel comfortable? Or if other colleagues would like to refer. I mean, there have been some thinking around the professional identity, the professional development, and how important is that we are equipping those that are already in the system. Now the question is, what do we do with those that are going to enter the system? How well prepared they are also to embrace such an approach. Or yes, who would like to, or maybe Stefania, would you feel comfortable to say yes, please?
Okay, so thank you for the question. For me, as a university teacher working with the students, for the future teachers, and of course on pre-service and also in-service sectors. So changing attitudes, this is not one-day work. And I think what I already reflected on, reading the guide and preparing for this panel, I will bring this book to my students in order to read and reflect on critical reflections. And these critical reflections and being in the context, and again, this model of reflective practice and learning based on reflective practice, supporting us to change our attitudes. No one from outside can do this. We need to meet people, we need to read books and to reflect on that. So, and in programs, higher education programs for pre-service students and future teachers, we need to pay a lot of attention to this sector, I should say, or part of the competence, that is values and attitudes, but not from the book, but reflecting on the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefania. I was thinking the same, that actually it's a very good resource for including it in the curriculum for pre-service training.
Well, if there is a time,
yes,
I can just a very brief comment on this. And I totally agree with Stefania, but would also like to bring additional perspective, which is that ongoing reforms are already changing practice in so many countries, and would be extremely important for the higher ed to be part of these processes, to understand what is happening, to use model centers, so centers where the practice is really improving the way how young children are receiving services, so that students can be part of what is really happening in these model centers, and also that practitioners from the centers can be also part of reforming curriculum of the universities. They're really trying to inbuild this kind of new knowledge into the curriculum and modules and trainings they're offering. And we have done this in a couple of countries and had extremely positive results of this cooperation of practice and universities' capacities to support changes.
Thank you so much, Dragana. I think that's an excellent addition to thinking of, it's not just about collaboration between professionals that are providing the service, but it's also collaboration between institutions that are in the system, and that is those that are governing, those that are preparing, those that are delivering services. So it's a broader understanding of how important is the collaboration and coordination in making this change happen. Last question for today, and I hope that we have triggered a lot of interest from our audience to read the guide. Let's guide them also ourselves in where they should look more precisely if they are policymakers or training providers or practitioners or even parents. So let's see what Antula can recommend for policymakers, where they should focus primarily their attention in the guide. I mean, I know it could be good if they read the entire guide, but you know, they might want to be more selective. Would you recommend specific specific sections or specific issues that are treated in the guide? Antula.
Yes, thank you, Michaela. As I was again listening to the discussions, I would say that a starting point in terms of wanted to add something about the mindset and the attitudes, and I think it's linked to the policy makers discussion, is that a starting point, a very key, is to establish a shared language, a shared terminology and understanding about inclusive education. And this will help the cross-sectoral collaboration which is needed. So in terms of the very specific examples in this guidance, some really useful information that I think policymakers and other stakeholders involved in decision-making positions, they could look at concrete examples. For example, the coalition, the Georgian coalition on page 16 is a very good example of how civil society organizations have contributed to the development of a national early childhood intervention system. And there are also very concrete examples of reform processes a recent analysis that the European agency has conducted in 2019 has identified a number of areas, policy areas that policymakers might find useful to check. And there are also some good quality practice available in other projects that are listed on page 21. So these would be my suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antula. Let's see now, Lani, what you would suggest if we refer, for example, for those working in the centers, leaders or practitioners or specialists, where they should focus more their attention when reading this guide, which part of the guide, let's say, speaks more for them?
Well, I think that professionals in the resource centers and in mainstream schools will be able to find something that supports their work. And I think, as I said earlier, rather than point people to a particular strategy or a particular page in the guide, there's this idea, a way of approaching the guide that says, find yourself in the guide. Find the place where you can make a difference in your work, where the change is within your remit and the role that you have, and then read that section. And I think that will not be difficult for people to do. I think they will see things that will catch their eye and they'll think, that's me, I can do that. If they're a class teacher, there's the lesson plan, for example, etc. There's the person-centered planning tools. The other thing I'll say very quickly, because we haven't mentioned it so far, is that we have really tried to provide as up-to-date information as possible in terms of the content of the guide around issues of learning. And, you know, we really are drawing on recent developments in that field of learning and assessment. And so there is a lot that is very up to date. It's not recycling old ideas about how you have a multidisciplinary team, but really thinking about how those things are integrated. So there is quite a bit of content that will be useful for practitioners as well.
Thank you so much, Lani. And let's hear now from Dragana I think that we have talked not enough, I would say, but we had to make do with the time that we have at our disposition. What about parents? I mean, would this guide be also informative for them?
Yes, definitely. We feel that parents and parents' organizations should be empowered by the emphasis in the book on the importance of their role in all aspects of naturalistic assessments, planning, delivering, monitoring, and advocating for inclusive education services. The role of parents in deciding on the best provision for their child and for keeping them involved in the provision during key decision making and review stages needs to be improved in the region. This is the message of the book. The book promotes creation of opportunities for parents to educate themselves on what is legally mandated and what choices exist, and opportunities created by settings. They encourage their close partnership. The publication perceives parents as equal partners and builds on the family strength model of supporting young children, and promotes parent choices, capacities, and motivation not only to collaborate with professionals, but also to extend good practices from the settings to their home environment. The book also acknowledges the great role that organized parents and civil society groups have played in supporting inclusive education movement more globally. Major achievements in developing positive family-centered policies and services for young children in the region would not have been possible without civil society engagement, and in particular efforts of the United Parent-led organizations that became the government's main partners in building the national inclusive systems in the region. My final remark goes to ISA. We are incredibly grateful to ISA for their expertly hosting of this event. ISA has also kindly agreed to host this publication on their website to actually support and inspire and serve the needs of multiple stakeholders working on inclusive education reforms, which is the main purpose of this guidance. So thank you so much, Michael, and the whole team of ISA.
Well, we are to thank you. I think that entire early childhood community thanks you for this guide. We are honored, as I said from the very beginning. We do very much promote the idea of inclusion and coordination and multi-sectoral approach. So it's like complex changes need complex solutions. And that for that, I think that you have helped a lot ourselves in in navigating into, you know, it's a maze, yes, when you want to make order in how to change a system in a very positive way that addresses discrimination or exclusion. And we are, as you all said, we are still in the process, and I think that we will continue to be, but it helps a lot to have such kind of intellectual efforts of putting together, not only, as Lani would say, not just recycling things that have been said. I think it's more how we nurture our continuous thinking of how we can achieve what we so much want. Inclusive, equitable, quality services for all children, for everybody and for all. And I think this is our endeavor, and that's why we are all together here. And we are thanking you, both of you and all of you contributing to this discussion today, but also of making, I suppose, we hope so, making all our colleagues that have chosen to be today with us to read the guide, but not only to read it. I think we need to make this guide actionable. Maybe it can be also a resource for making workshops with different types of professionals working with vulnerable children, even looking for how this can be transferred in working, as I said, addressing inclusion, where we talk about different vulnerable groups. I think that's a wealth of ideas that we have there, and we just need now to see how we can make use of it, because otherwise all the effort, I think, has been just a nice but very serious effort from your end. We are inviting everybody to download it from our website. So you go on our website on www.isa.nl, and on the section of the Knowledge Hub, where we have more than 200 resources. If you choose the right filters, you will certainly find it. It's about diversity and vulnerable groups, and it's a guidebook or a hands-on tool. So we certainly invite you to download it from there. And if you are a friend of us by signing up to our newsletter or going to our website to see other events that we are organizing as this one, please visit periodically our website, because we are always interested in hosting such kind of meetings that are really bringing something new in our thinking. We are living challenging times and we want positive changes, as the guide is proposing. So that's what we are trying to do through all that we are doing in ISA, and I suppose all that our panelists today are doing. A warm thank you to all of you, and wishing all of you the best, and wishing all of those who have listened to us to use the guide. Thank you to each of you, and good rest of the day ahead.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.